Good evening, everyone. Welcome to week 10 of the second season of the Pacific Division Sheltering Capacity Building Series. We do have 12 sessions, and the last session will be the end of this month. This meeting will be recorded, and the link will be sent out within a week with slides. All the recordings are also posted on YouTube. You can search for Red Cross Pacific Division on the YouTube. Your camera and mic have been disabled. You're able to type your questions in the chat in the meantime, and your mic will be open towards the end for questions and answers. I do encourage you all to type your name and your region in the chat, and please say hi to each other. My name is Yi-Wei. I am a volunteer. I joined Red Cross in 2009, and I'm the Los Angeles Region's Mass Care Program Lead. This is a series where I invite all the subject matter experts in mass care or mass care related functions to share their knowledge and to build our workforce confidence. Today, we actually have a special guest today. This is not a topic that we talk often. This is not a topic that we discussed before, but I do think it's important. It's not only important in disasters, I think it's important in general. So today we have Bob from California Gold Country, and he's going to present to us assisting children in disasters. And I hope that you will also take this lesson into your daily life or interactions. I think will be very helpful. Bob, here you go. Bob, can you unmute yourself?
I'm sorry. I thought you were controlling me. Welcome to everybody. It's good to see we have over 70 people already. And I wonder if you can show with a raise of your hand how many of you have ever taken a course specifically focusing on assisting children in disaster. One. Okay, thank you. You helped me make my first point. We tend in the Red Cross to see our service to clients, and almost as an afterthought, we say, and some of them have children. But rather, I would submit that children are our clients, and they are just as important as the adults that we serve. And there are no specific courses in the Red Cross curriculum for assisting children, even though their needs are different and the impact of trauma on children is greater than it is for adults. So welcome to this presentation. We're going to rush through it a little bit because this is actually a 4-hour course crammed into 50 minutes. So if you can listen quick, I'll talk quick. These are some of the units we're going to cover. First, when we deal with children, we need to remember that like almost everything else, our experiences in life affect us differently depending upon our age and stage of development. When I used to think girls were dumb until I was 12 years old. Then I hit a stage of development where I thought girls were pretty cool. Disaster experiences are no different. Children absorb them according to their stage of development, and that's something we need to keep in mind. We cannot say, oh, this is a child, we're going to treat them like we treated some other child, because if they are not at the same stage of development, we will probably not be treating them in the most effective way. Age and stage of development will determine their response to the disaster, and it will determine the impact on the family system. Now, that's about a 30-minute lecture just in that sentence. But keep in mind, if you would, that the disaster gets interpreted through the mind of a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old. If you spend time with children who are particularly vulnerable and worried about the loss of their home, you will find it's not unusual for a child, when told his home is gone, to think he will never, ever have another one, especially if that's the only home he's ever had. So the stage of development is going to determine the impact on the child. It will also determine the resilience and the recovery for that child. Ask yourself, how does your worldview differ from that of a child? Where do you find security? I'll bet it's not the same place a 3-year-old finds security. How do you know what will happen tomorrow? Not from the news. If you're a child, what things are you afraid of? What do you need to do to go to sleep? Can you speak your feelings? As you go through those simple questions, you hopefully become aware that your way of looking at the world differs significantly from that of a child. If children have limited information, they fill in the blanks with inaccurate information. I once dealt with a child who thought that I was told that the way you have babies is that mommy goes to the hospital. Well, this child had already gotten some crude and semi-accurate information about pregnancy and how it happens. And he noticed that his father went to the hospital with his mother when she delivered. So he assumed that that's where they had intercourse, in the hospital, uh, because he didn't have all the information there was to have, and he needed to fill in the blanks. And that's what children will do. If they don't have the information, they often don't know how to ask for the information they need, and they will fill in the blanks, making it up if necessary. My other story on that one is the cartoon I saw years ago where a man and his wife are sitting at the breakfast table, and the husband says to his wife, "Did you hear about the stock market crash yesterday?" And the child at the table says, "I didn't do it." Uncertainty has more impact on children than on adults because they have no past experience to guide them. Anytime anybody, child or not, comes into a new experience, they look around and copy the behavior of others. If you're old enough, you may remember the candid camera sequence they would do where the elevator would get stuck in between floors. And they would have a Confederate passenger on that elevator, and he would be prompted to say immediately when the elevator got stuck, he'd say, "Well, I guess we all need to sit down and just wait it out." And he would sit down. Then pretty soon everybody was sitting down. In other scenarios, the Confederate would say, "Let's all yell so they know we're here." And pretty soon everybody is yelling. Well, if we get into a situation we've not been in before, we look to other people for clues. With children, it's happening even more frequently because the children have no prior experience and they need to look at the adults and the people in the shelter and look at their own child peers. And that's where we need to be careful about the examples of behavior that we show them. And they have no experience in disasters, so it's going to impact them more severely. Change
Bob,
in
we have a
adult,
question before you
yes.
proceed. Up to what age will children fill in the blanks for information?
Will children what? Fill in the information?
Up
Uh,
to what age will they fill the information?
until they learn to do critical thinking. For some people, that's 99. For some, for some people, it's 14 to 18. That answer the question?
Yes, we can proceed.
Okay. The change in adult behavior brings a loss of sense of safety and security. So we want to encourage parents especially to keep their behavior as normal as possible. What if children are watching adults for their clues and they see shelter staff acting inappropriately, um, going around saying, this is the worst disaster I've ever seen, or this is going to be a total disaster this evening. If children are overhearing that sort of thing, and that's the only input they have about disaster, we have not just failed to help them, we have actually been detrimental to their mental health. Children always focus on the present, not the future. So to tell a child they will only be in the shelter for a week brings little or no comfort. If you say to the child, we're having pizza tonight, chances are that child may well feel much more positively than the news of what will happen in a week or even the next day. So that's one of the things we really want to keep in mind with children, recognizing that they live in the present, not the future. With children, locus of control is external, not internal. By locus of control, we mean, how do you feel your life is controlled? Do you feel it's internal or external? There are people who go through life saying the locus of control for my life is external. The only reason I'm not successful is because of, and then fill in the blank. Whether you want to blame any number of people, you want to blame the school you went to, or the parents that didn't show good examples, that's an external locus of control. People with an internal locus of control say, no, I will succeed in life based upon my own efforts and my diligence. But with children, the internal locus of control is a part of the maturing process. Children themselves, the younger they are, the more they realize control is beyond them. It's outside of them. That's why children cry in the middle of the night. Otherwise, they would just get up and get a bottle of milk out of the refrigerator. But they feel that they need to have somebody bring it to them. And they are trying to actually gain control by being so obnoxiously noisy in the middle of the night that their milk will appear. Adults express emotions verbally. They will tell us how they feel. Children express feelings behaviorally. Very simple axiom, very, very true. And it decreases as children get older, certainly, but children of all ages are more likely to show their feelings by behavior rather than words. This is the long chart on children's stress reactions, and we're going to skip the two columns of feelings and thinking because we're doing an abbreviated version of this course here tonight. But under behavior, these, remember, are normal behaviors: clinginess, aggressive or disruptive behavior, children being withdrawing, regressive behavior, thumb sucking, bedwetting, not wanting to sleep alone, reliving events through play, and asking a lot of questions or telling stories related to the event. Sometimes those stories are quite imaginative, but they are telling, if they're exaggerating or making up a story, their feelings are buried in that story, even if they don't know how to name the feelings. And the same thing with all of these other behaviors, there are feelings behind them. If a child gets stuck in these behaviors, then that's the time to make a referral to your DMH worker. These are specific ages and stages. I'll just stop talking for a while, let you read through them so you get a sense of how children are developing? Let's just stop here for a minute. If you're trying to relate to a child who is, let's say 6 to 12 here, where they're in the mastery stage, what kind of activity is going to help that child feel competent and therefore competent to also live through the current crisis of the loss of his home, for instance? Well, it's going to be an activity that he can master. Should be a challenge, but not impossible or difficult. This just to illustrate how people in the shelter can present children with activities that are meaningful for their stage of development, for them to deal with the trauma and difficulty of being in the shelter with us. Disaster's impact on children. This is, in my judgment, not seriously it's not taken seriously enough by the Red Cross. The younger the school-aged child is at the time of the disaster, the greater the impact. The longer lasting the symptoms of avoidance and re-experiencing, and the longer lasting and more severe the PTSD symptoms. And you can look this up. This has been researched. The Slave Lake fire in Alberta, California. We studied these children for 6 months, and we studied the different studied them by age groups, and always the younger children, the impact of the disaster lasted longer, the symptoms were more severe, and they were more likely to develop PTSD symptoms. Slave Lake Fire, Alberta, California. And let me ask you, especially if there's some disaster mental health people, how much training did we have in realizing that one of our primary obligations as mental health people in the DMH program is toward children? This is a reorienting, I think, that we need to bring into our organization. Let's look at shelter culture and activities. Does a shelter, just think about it, does a shelter become a place that attracts children? How many, if our children go to school in the morning from the shelter, how many children do you think are saying, gee, I wish I could go to the shelter? uh, it doesn't happen. We need to look at the culture and the activities that happen in the shelter. In the shelter, we want to limit exposure to the media, including television coverage of the disaster. This is true also for adults. The constant CNN playing of disaster pictures and disaster statistics is not good for adults. It's even worse for children. Children, if they're listening to the media that's regurgitating the story every hour, don't necessarily even have the ability, depending upon their age, to realize that this is not a repetition of information, but just it takes them a whole hour to tell us how bad things are, and then it just gets repeated over and over again. If we want to facilitate a child moving through the disaster. We facilitate that by return to routine activities. In my judgment, every family that comes into the shelter with children should have special attention because we can help children in a remarkable way by getting them to return to routine activities, to get them back to a normal school schedule. Their bedtime routine should be the same. I always encourage parents, whatever you do at home before bedtime, do it here. If you hold and rock your child, we're going to try and find you a rocking chair. If you say prayers and have a glass of warm milk before the child goes to bed, we're going to try to make that possible. If you read a story to your child after they're under the covers, we're going to try to make that available. The normal bedtime routine should be repeated in the shelter, just like at home. Normal play activities will help children settle down. If we can take the time to find out the child's interest, then we can provide the opportunities for them to feel good in the present moment. And remember, for a child, the present is the world, not the future. If we can provide meal times that are normal for the child and feed them familiar foods, they are going to feel at home. These are important things for children. If children are already very uncomfortable and we're feeding them food that they don't even recognize or have never had or is culturally inappropriate, then they don't feel that they are in a safe place. We also want to facilitate the connection with friends. These are all things that we should be discussing with parents every time they come into a shelter. If we have enough mental health people, that's a good place for this conversation to happen. If we have to just make a note for when a mental health person arrives, then we can make the referral then. But you don't have to be a shrink type to help a family reproduce the normal sense that the child has at home. Remember, please, that parents are our partners. In a stable family, they are the most important support relationship for the children. They might need some support and some education as to what would help their child most in this situation. But the family is the child's umbrella that protects them. When we support the parents, we support the child. And please, please see that your shelter has this after a crisis helping young children heal. Those are not universally available. They should be available. If you want to twist an arm anywhere up the ladder, I would urge you to do that because this is an important part of psychoeducation for parents undergoing trauma. Designing the shelter to support children. If ever you set up a shelter, look at these pictures. These pictures are actually off of the Red Cross website. Note the child-friendly elements in the first picture. Can anybody name a child-friendly element in that first picture? No hands are raised. How about the second one? Is that I went too far, didn't I? Is that a friendly picture? What happened to it? There it is. Those guys look like they're waiting to register somebody for a jail. Why are there no toys? Why are there no stuffed animals sitting on that table? Why is there no chair that's a child-sized chair? Why is there no table that's a child-sized table where children can entertain themselves and go over and do some drawing or coloring? We can make the shelter a child-friendly place, beginning already at the registration table. I highly recommend it. It can be a scary time for kids to be told, we're going to go sleep in this school gymnasium among all these other people that you don't know. So let's see if we can get an initial positive response for the children. This, in the longer course, we actually draw this out. You've seen this if you've taken the sheltering course, but just think about this diagram. Where do children fit in? Where will you have a place for children in the shelter? Usually, when we do a shelter, or at least all too often, if I show up at the shelter, they'll say to me, "Oh, we didn't know we were going to have so many children." And again, we thought we were going to have clients with children, but where is I'm getting distracted by all the stuff. I'm sorry, all the questions people are asking. We need to get an area from the very beginning where we can say this is going to be the children's area where children can go be themselves and it'll be safe and we don't have to worry about their safety in there. We do this for the adults. We make sure that they have a place to sleep, maybe a place to watch television, maybe a place to smoke. We do all of these for adults, but children need some square footage as well. Oh, that's goes with that exercise. Here's a reminder for child-friendly food. There's absolutely nothing wrong if we have some feeding people here to say, we got some children in this shelter. It wouldn't hurt if we had peanut butter and jelly available, even if that's not the menu for the day. Remember, you need to stash your shelter with these items. Make sure they're on your shelter ahead of time. And note the needs at registration time. We ask on our shelter registration, if I recall, if somebody needs some physical help. Will they need a step to get into bed? Will they need a climber or a walker? Because we have disabled people or people with functional needs, and we don't provide the same attention to children. In my opinion, when we have children in the shelter, DMH, disaster mental health, should be notified of their presence because they do require some special attention, which is not a part of our normal training. We should try for consistency of staff relating to one or more children. If we have a staff member in the shelter who is relating well to the children, I would hope that the supervisors would allow that staff person to be primarily looking after those children. Not that they can spend most of their time doing it, but that the child can have some consistency in relating to the staff. Joining the child is a 15-minute lecture. I can't give that here. Come to the 4-hour course when it's offered. We need to provide parents the opportunity to enroll their children in school. We will deal with that in detail in a little bit. We should take an inventory of our toys, our art materials, etc. Do they manage the age-appropriate needs of the child? And are donated materials safe? Now, we need to pay attention to all those things, but for those of us that are setting up our local shelter trailers, it would be good if we had our mental health people go through the trailer and look at the toys that we're going to offer children. Do they match all of the different the different ages and stages of the children we're likely to serve? Or are they very limited in terms of what age groups they're going to serve? Is your children's area bilingual? This is, of course, an increasing need to have bilingual materials, bilingual books, and bilingual people relating to children, as well as adults. Now, we always need to abide by Red Cross doctrine regarding childcare. And I'm just going to stop with that one sentence because there's lots of rules and protocols around that. But be aware of it and follow it. We need to encourage parents to have their children reconnect with supportive people, culture, traditions, and rituals, so that if a child normally celebrates certain religious holidays that may not be the same religious holidays you do, we need to find a way for those families to celebrate those holidays. This brings comfort and support to both children and adults. We want to be aware of children subject to abduction by their own parent. This is particularly important when we have divorced parents and a parent comes into the shelter looking for their child. They may be a legitimate parent, they maybe just don't have custody. So this can become a sticky wicket. If you have mental health people who are experienced in this kind of problem, by all means, use them. If they're not in your shelter and you feel uncomfortable with two warring parents, each of them wanting to relate to the child, get your mental health person in there because it's not rocket science to sort out the details, but it would be if you don't have experience in the area. Properly manage shelter clients who are required to report their locations to law enforcement. Now, I think we probably are aware as to who those people are. If you are on probation, you might be required to let your probation monitor know that you are staying in the shelter. If you are a sex offender, you have other issues as well. You are required to make certain reports to the authorities. But when we have these people, not one policy covers them all, because sex offenders are not all alike. Some of them were, say, offenders when they were 19 years old and had a 16-year-old girlfriend, and now they're 52 and been married for 30 years. Those are different sex offenders than some other types. So we have to properly manage them. We have to involve the shelter manager. We should also be involving mental health, and shelters need to be designed so that we don't have to house some of these people with the general population. And that can be dealt with in a number of ways, but this again is a way that we can protect children. Unaccompanied and separated minors. This is a confusing situation for some. Let's look first at the definition. Unaccompanied minor, younger than 18, who has been separated from both parents, from legal guardians and other relatives, schools, and childcare providers, are not being cared for by an adult who by law or custom is responsible for doing so. That's an unaccompanied minor. A separated child is a somewhat less severe situation. This is a child who is separated from both parents or from his or her previous legal guardian or customary caregiver, but not necessarily from other family members. So this is the category in which a younger child who arrives at the shelter with, say, a 19-year-old older brother would fall. Because the 19-year-old brother is not responsible for taking care of that child, but neither is this child an unaccompanied minor. So you have these two definitions, unaccompanied and separated. In other words, if the child arrives without someone legally responsible for the care and welfare of the child, special treatment, considerations, and procedures are necessary. Shelter workers must do the following: determine the status of the child. Are they unaccompanied or are they separated? Determine if an adult legally responsible for the child can be immediately located and reunification accomplished. Such a situation would happen if their parents are already there. In either case, one must immediately notify the shelter supervisor. If possible, alert DMH of the unaccompanied or separated child's presence in the shelter and complete the unaccompanied minor Red Cross form. Most of us were trained in that at some point. It's useful for us to become reacquainted with it. We then arrange for a certified Red Cross worker, not a EBV, to supervise the child at all times, 24/7. Until background checks are completed, EBVs cannot be supervisors for unaccompanied minors. So an unaccompanied minor in the shelter, as you might imagine, immediately decreases the flexibility of our staff. Next, we notify law enforcement. Depending upon legal jurisdiction, this could be police, sheriff, or child protection services. We register the child's presence in the shelter with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. There's the 800 number. This is really important that we do this because we have an MOU that says we will do it, and we don't want to let the child welfare world think that we're not living up to our promises. We notify the Red Cross reunification team, formerly Safe and Well. We develop a transfer and reunification plan. This plan must already be present on the form that we fill out for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which is then faxed to them immediately upon being completed. That reunification plan may be as simple as we're going to find transportation for the parents from another shelter to come pick up their child. It may be we're turning the child over to CPS. It may be this community has been so destroyed that we can't even reach CPS. The police say they're too busy, and so we are preparing to keep the child overnight. That is also a possibility, but that needs to be in writing in a reunification plan. Okay, we covered 11 already. What to remember: if a child's brought to the shelter under the supervision of a teacher, school bus driver, or other school employee, in such a case, the school personnel are responsible for reunifying the child with the appropriate caregiver. It is not the Red Cross's responsibility. If a bus driver shows up at the shelter and intends to deliver you a half a dozen children and then to go home to his family, you tell that bus driver, if you do, we will report you for abandoning children and endangering them. Because if they are under the supervision of any school facility or staff when the disaster strikes, those are the only people responsible for reunification. Finally, if a birth parent does not have sole or joint physical custody of a child following a divorce, said parent cannot be given custody of the child. They may be the biological parent, but if they do not have at least joint physical custody, they are not to be given the child under any circumstances, except that you will be turning the child over to law enforcement, and it will be their responsibility at that point to decide how to handle it. Now we're coming to my pet thing, the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. How many of you have ever heard of this? Raise your hands if you would, please. We have only one who's ever heard of this. Oh, I see. 3, 4. All right, this shows what a problem we have. We know that children do best when their activities return to normal. Normal for children includes school. That's a place where they can practice mastery of their activities for their age group. This is a place where they can tell the story of their trauma and disaster with their peers, who will provide a different form of support than adults. The McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act says this. Please listen carefully. I am really trying to advocate for our children. What it says is, any child who is homeless because of a disaster has the right to go to school, either at the school they went to formerly or at the nearest school to their present location. If they choose, if the parents choose to send the child back to the school he or she was attending at the time of the disaster, the school is required to provide the transportation. I'm going to say it again. If the child wants to go to his original school, the school is required by federal law to provide the transportation to their home school. If the child decides to go to the school nearest to the shelter, that school must enroll them immediately. They cannot question their vaccination status. They cannot say, we'll admit them when we have their school records. None of that. Nor can they say, since he wasn't here at the beginning of the year, he can't go out for football or cannot participate in tutoring programs. None of that is allowable. The child who is homeless by a disaster must have all the privileges of all the other students. If you get resistance on this, or if the parents get resistance, then you just ask for the homeless child advocate for that school. If they say to you, we don't have a child advocate, you tell them to call their lawyer because the law requires them to have one. And you then go to the school district and ask for the homeless child advocate. They will always have one. And they too are required by law to have this. Why do we want to advocate for our children? For their academic progress, to restore routine, so they can reconnect with their support system. It increases a sense of mastery, and they are able to tell the story of the disaster in a familiar and safe environment. Any child who lacks a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence is considered homeless. This includes children living in Red Cross shelters, even if their home has not been destroyed, even if it's merely an evacuation. Also included are children whose families are doubling up I'm sorry, I pressed the wrong button, whose families are doubling up or living in motels or trailer parks or campgrounds or living in shelter not ordinarily used as sleeping accommodations. They can be comfy as they can be in their own 50-foot exotic camping vehicle, but they are still considered homeless under the law if this is a result uh, of a disaster or an evacuation. Homeless students have these rights. They are not privileges, they are rights. To attend school regardless of where they live or how long they've lived there, attend a local school or their school of origin, receive transportation to the school of origin, immediate enrollment if school or health records are missing or unavailable, and full participation in all school programs. These are rights, not privileges.
Bob, we have 15 minutes left.
I know, and we're almost done. This is the website you can go to get every little jot and tittle of information on this law. And we're not going to deal with mandated reporting because I think we don't have time to cover it properly. Note too that these are our partners. We have an MOU with these three groups. Children's Disaster Service is the one I'm most familiar with. They will come with their own specialized activity materials. They will come and set up a safe and monitored environment in your shelter. They will come from local folks who have been specially trained and screened, or they will have a national deployment bring them to you and your shelter. The Red Cross, if they bring people in from out of town, will pay the expenses for that, for these volunteers. And I highly recommend them, especially on a big disaster or anytime you have children that are hung up in a shelter and not doing well. This is just some of the areas that they had set up on previous disasters. Do we have questions?
Thank you so much, Bob. So we have some chats uh, in the, I couldn't even talk. How do we determine if an adult has custody?
How what?
How do we determine if the adult has custody?
Well, that's why you want to, first of all, involve your mental health people who have experience in this area. If I were to answer that question adequately, I think I'd use up the rest of the question time. But ultimately, it's the police or CPS who are responsible for making that final determination.
And could you tell us what CPS stand for?
What CPS stands for Children's Protective Service. That's what we're normally called in California and other places that might have other names.
Okay, thank you. I don't see other questions. I see a lot of discussion. Tonight's video will be posted on YouTube, just like every other video. That is going to be on YouTube. YouTube, there's also other videos, including there's a disaster relief orientation for the DR 157 that is up north. I think I encourage everyone to watch it, even if you're not getting assigned to the DR. I think it has a lot of good information in it. Next week, it's the one that we postponed from several weeks ago that we're going to talk about difficult situations, how to handle them. Then the following week, in conclusion, we're going to talk about resilience. Do we have any other questions in the chat? I see one here that just popped up. So we have a question. Are the parents required to be with the child at all times when they're in the shelter?
That's, I think, the basic answer is yes, but obviously there are situations where friends might do childcare for other friends because they have recovery tasks that need to be done. Ultimately, that's managed by your shelter supervisor, and different shelters might have different rules.
Okay, and we also have another question that you mentioned earlier. This is abbreviated version because we only had an hour and usually it's 4 hours. So where can they take the full training if they want to hear your 4 hour version?
If you get enough people to make it worthwhile, and you write me and ask me to come, I will come. Um, I think this is an emphasis that we really need to have. And, I'm dedicated to children. I'm dedicated to children in disaster. And I will come teach the course anytime there's a reasonable number of people who want me to do so. I am in Northern California. I'm in Redding. Unfortunately, I'm moving 400 miles north in another month. Um, but I would even schedule a class when I'm going to be down here visiting relatives or so. So that's how much I believe in filling this gap in our training.
And Bob, we didn't really introduce you from early on. We said you're from Goat Country and you're a licensed, therapist. But can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you do in your regular job, or, what do you usually do?
Well, I've had three wonderful careers. I was a parish pastor in an inner city church um, for 16 years. I had both of my congregations were multi-ethnic. I had very few white people in either of my congregations, which was kind of a pleasure actually, uh, to be allowed into that intimate situation with minorities. My next career, I was a full-time marriage and family therapist for 20 years. And then my third career has been the last 17 years with the Red Cross, disaster mental health.
Perfect. And and Bob, are you open to virtual trainings instead of
I
in
would,
person?
well, I could certainly do that. 4 hours of a virtual training might be a little boring. And the training is in many ways, I think, more impactful when you're face to face. I think that about all of our training, where you can actually tell jokes, tell stories, do more illustrating of how some of these principles work and so forth. And I don't know if I'd want to listen to that for 4 hours. Um, the exercise on designing a shelter is an exercise that's done by the group on large, oversized prints of the shelter uh, layout. And it's a different experience than you can do online. Would I do a training online? Sure, I would, because I believe in the subject, but I think much is lost when you do that.
I agree. In-person experience is always better. And how many people do you think it will be a good size group?
Oh, I would think, let's see, I've only done this for groups of more than 30. Uh, my experience is that when it's offered at an institute, it's often the biggest class because people do see the need. So that would make a lot of sense if one of our regions wanted to do it as part of their institute. I could teach other things too while I'm there if that's appropriate and desired. Um, would I do it for 10 people? Well, sure, I would, but would I travel 600 miles for 10 people? I don't know. That would be kind of a big burden. Unless we held it in Northern California, where I'll be coming down to visit family.
So I understand the concept of, the more the better, but realistically, for the better experience for the attendees, what do you think is the best number? I mean, we're not saying that you have to fly 600 miles, but we're just saying that for
Right.
knowledge purposes, what's the best group size in order to experience, all the interactive part, the exercise part?
Right. I would think 20 to 40 would be a good size. Certainly, when you get beyond 40, it's maybe a little hard to work with a group that big in a process sort of a way. And 20 is still big enough.
Great. Thank you. I think you will have the audience. We had more than 100 people attending today. And for the past several minutes, all the chats are, yes, let's set up the class. So I think if we get the word out, we were able to set up the class. Um, thank you very much. And one last thing I want to ask is that if there's one wisdom or tips or advice that you will give to anyone, not only in shelter, not only in recovery, not only in disaster action team, just in general, anything related to disaster, what would you give?
Did you say gift?
No, I said tips, advice.
Oh, tip. Just remember that children are clients. They're not just tag-alongs with our clients. And by the way, I did notice somebody in the chat while we were doing the presentation who said, whatever happened to our Mickey Mouses? Mickey Mouses are gone. I understand because Disney decided not to do it. I will tell you, I don't think Mickey Mouses were ever a good gift for children. Did you ever hug one of those dolls? They are very hard and they don't hug back. If we're gonna do stuffed toys for kids, we need to do cuddly things, things that are soft, things that they can sleep with without rolling over and hurting themselves. You can buy really, really nice um, animals for $5 at Kohl's or online with at Amazon. Get a donor to say, sure, I'll do that, and then give the kids those animals. It'll be much more comforting than the Mickey Mouse.
Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to present. And thank you all for joining us today on a busy Wednesday. I will see you all next week for the exciting and fun part of how to handle difficult situations. Thank you all. Have a great night.
Thank you very much. Good night.